Hawthorn, they've got some good young players, but I would have thought they could ill afford to jettison that amount of experience. So it's something we haven't seen a lot of necessarily in more recent years because it was spectacularly unsuccessful for Melbourne. Why do you think Hawthorn have done it? What's their rationale?
Well, I think internally, and maybe it's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, they realise, I think, that it was 2 years too late that Clarkson convinced them to keep topping up, and they're probably dirty on that. It's obviously the wrong strategy, I think, so it goes back to then. So it's about, well, we've got to cut deep. They still could have kept, and I've thought about it at the time, that with Mitchell and O'Meara and Gunston, who they wanted to keep, weren't going to be part of the next premiership. They weren't. So do you want to be middle of the table, like North Melbourne were there under Brad Scott, and you don't get early draft picks and your rebuild's not going to maximise? I can understand Sam's theory about getting games into kids in the midfield, and we always coaches pull out stats, don't we, to justify what we've done. He said, well, the problem's not in the midfield, which is where Mitchell and O'Meara were. It's other parts of the ground, which is a fair point. The only thing by having experienced players there is that they can take the heat, like against Sydney and against Essendon when it's capitulating, that physically they can take the bumps, but mentally they can show some leadership about perseverance and hanging. So they can show the way, and they can help. They can take the pressure off the younger players. So yeah, I can see the point, but it's an interesting one. I certainly don't blame them rebuilding, but the downside to it, what happens is it's membership and sponsorship. That's more the issue rather than the pressure from the media. Internal, it's about, does it equate to an economic downfall?
I'm glad you said that, because this is one of the things I've touched on in this column. So I started off talking about how much they've jettisoned. Just to give you an idea too, the average games played on their list now is, I think, down to 46. It's down about 10 games per player across the board. But the thing that it's down 20 games or something per player. It's an incredible amount. The thing that really struck me was the next youngest list in the competition, which I think is Adelaide, is 10 games per player more experienced than Hawthorn. It's probably one of the youngest lists we've ever seen in football history. So it's a savage cut. But the thing I went on to talk about was, I just wonder how much pressure is coming to do this from off the field. And you alluded to membership and sponsorship. I read a column. There was a really interesting column in The Age last week written by a Hawthorn supporter who was taking his 8-year-old son to the footy, and his son has literally never seen Hawthorn win a game.
Yeah.
And the whole column was about, oh, gee, well, how do I keep him interested and whatever? And I had the same reaction as everyone else, which was, Hawthorn, you're kidding. This is a club which has averaged a flag once every 4 years.
Yeah, they've won the most flags since 61 or 71.
12 in 50-odd years. How can you possibly talk seriously about the hard times or whatever? And then I thought about it. And these young generations now, I don't want to go these kids, but there are so many more choices for them in terms of entertainment and sport.
Yeah.
I'm not sure anything gets invested with the same amount of interest and passion and patience as the things that we grew up loving.
Oh, there's no doubt about that.
So I think there's this sort of pressure on to turn things around quicker than there used to be.
And you can always, rusted on supporters like myself, can see if you win, like they did last year, win 8 games and they finish wherever they finish on the ladder, 12th, is that any good? Is it pick 8 in the draft that much worse than pick 1? Yeah, of course it is. So would you rather get Will Ashcroft last year, or would you rather get whoever they picked? Of course you'd rather get Will. Next year, apparently the number 1 pick is the next Dustin Martin. They reckon he's a superstar.
When don't they say that?
No, well, that's what they've written. So I'm only doing. Yeah. I've never seen the kid play, but so you think, is he better than? I'm not saying they're tanking. They're not doing that. They've cut the list on what they genuinely thought was best for their long-term future. No doubt. I think they're probably surprised internally and probably as a coaching group how poor they've been the first 2 weeks. I think they've probably, as clubs do, we overestimate where our group is at and the talent we've got on the list. I think they've got talent, but they're kids. I mean, Scrimshaw's not playing. I thought Scrimshaw was a really good player for them, but they're not picking him. So there's other players there who could play. And I'm not querying their selection process, but they are really young. They are really young, and their midfield, as Sam's saying, is not their issue. But John Newcomb, who's potentially a good player, but he's a second-year player. Yeah. I know he's got a body, but he needs good players around him. So they're going to take some big hits. The supporters are going to be unhappy because they're used to success. One of my best mates is a big Hawthorn supporter, and he's filthy. He's critical of them. And I said, mate, settle down. I said, what do you want them to do, win 8 games and finish 12th? And he said, oh, that'll be better. And I said, well, I don't know if that's the case. I said, I'm looking, when are they going to win their next premiership? And that's what they're thinking. They're going to be in the 8 in 3 years. Maybe they might be. But they certainly, this year and next year is going to be tough road. And if Sam's done that and the board have ticked off on it, which is obviously they've got to stick fat with him. They've got to stick fat and see this through.
You'd think they would, wouldn't you? I mean,
yeah, they will.
Andy Gower's very level-headed guy. The thing that really took me aback was I looked up the leadership group because I couldn't think who it was. In fact, I had trouble remembering James Sicily's captain now, you know. Yeah. He's actually 28. He's older than I thought. But one of the vice-captains is Dylan Moore. And it only seems like 2 years ago to me that he even sort of established himself as a regular senior player. So just one quick one, last one on this. Going back to that Melbourne example, I just felt like there were a number of young Melbourne players who got burned by this and whose development was also almost... Is that a real thing? Did we sort of embellish that story a bit, or were there genuinely a number of Melbourne players whose careers were stymied by being thrown to the wolves?
Yeah, you could easily say that, but then it depends on your development and the people you've got in your organisation. And you go to Melbourne again later, and they're still down the bottom when they got Petrarca and Oliver and that draft. So they've drafted really well for a couple of years and got a couple of stars. It turned around quickly. So I know they've had some players there. I think it can do, but as in stymie their development. And that's what my worry is. Even before the season started, what happens with that. But it depends on the coach, which you got trust in, as an ex-player, got trust in Sam, but trust in their coaches and trust in the way they go about it, that these players, that we have the right support around them, right development, that it won't hurt them long term.
Success catches up with you. I've got no doubt some of the impact of this is a direct result of 3 flags between 13 and 15 when they were topping up then. It just cumulatively takes a toll on their development.
And I think internally, I don't think the coach at the time, I think he was selling them, we can keep topping up, we're in there. And I don't think their list, if you look externally, was good enough to win it. And they got to that qualifying final. They lost to the Bulldogs in 16, which was, I thought they were overachieved. They finished the top 4. They kept topping up. And I think internally Hawthorn wanted to start to regenerate then in the next couple of years, like in 18, and it never happened. They kept topping up, and they are where they are at the moment.
Well, a coach becomes a powerful voice, particularly when he's a 4-time premiership coach.
Yeah, that's right. And that's where the clubs need to be stronger in what we stand for. I think Man City, I know they spent too much money, they hurt where they are at the moment, but I like their philosophy that this is the way we want to play. This is what we're about. This is our values, and our coach will fit what we believe. So they're actually strong about it. So that's where to go.